for being here. This is a public discussion about a possible vegetation ordinance. My name is Ryan Campbell. I'm on the Tuolumne County Board of Supervisors. I'm here with David Goldenberg. Dave, how you doing? Dave's a supervisor for District 1, and we both serve on the Tuolumne County Fire Safety Advisory Committee. And so part of our job with the advisory committee and with the other members, many of whom are on with us today, so we're looking at a vegetation ordinance. So I'll just kind of go over a little bit about why that is and what a vegetation ordinance means. And then Dory's going to take it from there and kind of go through what we're looking to learn and discover today. One of the biggest, most common things that people will call me about, and I'm sure Dave will probably agree, is problems with overgrowth in neighborhoods, unmaintained properties that are impacting the overall safety of communities when it comes to wildfire. And so one way that a lot of communities have approached that problem is by developing their own vegetation ordinance. Now, what that means is that our county currently operates under the State Public Resources Code, which is it's the minimum standard for vegetation clearance. And if you see on the little picture in front of us, it's the 100-foot vegetation clearance around private property, around developed structures. That is the only rule that exists right now in Tuolumne County, essentially, for vegetation maintenance on the within the county. It has nothing to do with property lines, with parcels that are unmaintained, that don't have developed structures on them. None of that is covered. There are no county rules that govern any of that right now. And so what we're looking to do is communicate with the public and try and develop an ordinance that is going to meet the needs of fire safety and vegetation management in our wildland communities, but also balance that with the needs of private property rights. And that's our purpose here today. That's what this Fire Safety Advisory Committee has been working on for the past 8 months or so. And we're really grateful to have you here to help us in this conversation. The way I usually break this down is into three basic questions that we're trying to answer here, or with a vegetation ordinance. One is if you have properties that are adjacent. One property is less than 100 feet from the property line, or a home. Say your home is less than 100 feet from your property line. You do everything right. You do your vegetation management on your property. You're good, but your neighbor doesn't do any vegetation management on their property. Who is responsible for the balance of that vegetation management on the property that is within 100 feet of your home? So that's one question. And that's a question that comes up very, very often for me as a supervisor and for the county in general. And right now, when somebody calls me with an issue related to that, there's not a thing that I or anyone in the county can really do to help in that situation. The second question that we typically are looking at with a vegetation ordinance of this type is has to do with large unmaintained parcels. There are communities throughout the county where you have some parcels that are within communities that are developed. They have homes on them. They have driveways, fire hydrants, that kind of thing. And then in the midst of these developed communities, you'll have a parcel that somebody purchased it possibly with the intention of developing it, and it never happened. So what do you do about those properties if they've just been overgrown for 25 years? Right now, the county has no recourse. You as a property owner have no recourse to try and get in touch with the owner of that property, to have them do some minimal maintenance on the property to make sure that it is fire safe. So that's the second kind of question that we're looking at here. And the last one is safe routes of ingress and egress. Who is responsible and how much responsibility lies with the county? How much responsibility lies with the property owner in terms of keeping public roadways clear of vegetation, public right-of-ways, driveways, shared driveways in communities, all of these things, we have no real way to determine who's responsible for what in keeping these routes of ingress and egress clear. And as we've seen with some of the fires that have happened in other communities throughout the state, having safe routes of egress is essential, and it saves lives. And having poor routes of ingress and egress can claim lives, as we saw in Paradise. So this is not a new thing. Vegetation, it is for our county, but there are roughly a dozen counties in rural parts of California that have vegetation ordinances of a similar type. Lake County, El Dorado, Butte County are some counties that we've looked at. Also, many cities within California have vegetation ordinances. Sonora is a perfect example of that, and I think we have Chief Amy New on the phone or on the line with us as well. She can possibly talk about that a little bit. And then in general, communities, HOAs, other fire safety groups will have vegetation ordinances of this type. So we're covering ground that's new for our county, but in a larger sense is not a new thing. And so what we're trying to do is develop this ordinance based off of what other communities have done and what is reasonable and what will work in our county. Dory, did I forget anything, or
No,
do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, I just want to go through real quick a couple ground rules for everyone. We put in the chat, respect the speaker. We often have different views and opinions, obviously, that are going to be expressed. Remember that we are focusing on the topic of a vegetation ordinance. Oftentimes we get questions, surrounding other areas within Office of Emergency Services or fire safety, but we are specifically talking about a vegetation ordinance tonight. You can raise your hand if you have a question at any time, or you can put your question in the chat, and we will get to that. Depending on the number of questions, we really want everyone to limit one question per person at a time to allow everyone to speak if they want to, and also limiting it to about 1 minute per person, depending on the number of participants that we end up getting. We will, circle back to you if you have multiple questions, absolutely. And then remember to please mute your phone and turn off your camera if you aren't speaking or one of the presenters, just because of the distraction it creates for everyone. So we appreciate that. I do want to start real quick with a poll. You will see these go out throughout the meeting. And so I'm going to launch this first poll. Can you guys see that?
Yes, we can, Dory.
Perfect, thank you.
Poll and enter your choice on the items.
Yes. It's a single choice.
Correct.
All righty. I got 8 of 16. And we recorded that, Tracy.
Do you show the results?
Let's see, 0-1 answered on your screen.
All righty, here we go. All righty. And you can see that, correct? The results.
No, I can't see it, but let me go to my other computer.
Yeah, now we're
Now
seeing
we
it,
can.
Dory.
Perfect. Okay, and can you record that, Tracy?
Yeah,
Educated group.
All righty. So I am going to stop sharing my screen because I do want to introduce Sam, who is with our GIS, and Sam is going to put up on the screen. We are working on a project with GIS to identify, I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. This is a map of, obviously, of Tuolumne County. What we've done is created some layers. It's a work in progress, so this is not something that is publicly accessible currently right now, but we're working on it. But we visually wanted to be able to show everyone that part of what Supervisor Campbell spoke of, and many of the committee members and the work group members, you know, the calls that we get from concerned citizens about the vacant lots. And so everything in red is a vacant lot within Tuolumne County that is not regulated by 4291, the defensible space requirements for those property owners that have a structure. And so
Dory, before you get too deep into that, you know, maybe if we can walk back to the results of the poll very quickly. What I saw is approximately 3/4 of the people were somewhat familiar with what we were proposing. I'm not sure that everybody recognized that because it was on the screen fairly briefly.
sure, I don't know if I can pull it back up.
Yeah, just wanted to acknowledge that we understand that this is new, everything that we're looking to do here, and you know, appreciate that the amount of people that are, you know, participating tonight understand that we're looking at this and trying to factor in everything as we move forward.
Yeah, yeah. So go ahead, Sam, pop back up. In this particular map, again, the illustration is the number of vacant lots that we have in Tuolumne County, which is part of the necessity for us to create a vegetation ordinance. And so the number of vacant lots that we have, we also have agricultural land that is zoned A10, A20, AE 37. You will see some overlap, obviously, with the kind of muted brownish parcels that are both vacant lots and also agriculturally zoned. We are very cognizant and aware and want to make sure the agricultural community is weighing in, and the property owners within agricultural zoned properties are weighing in, and how we can talk and carve out this vegetation ordinance and language that will meet the needs of becoming a more fire safe community through this ordinance. So the other thing, just for everyone's information, and if you zoom back out, there you go, the amount of public lands that we have, and also National Park Service land, federal land that we have in Tuolumne County. And so there's other layers that we'll end up showing, like very high fire severity zones that we will overlap. But this is a work in progress, and it's just a snippet of just visually showing residents and concerned citizens, you know, this is why we are working on the vegetation ordinance, and we need to have that. Thank you, Sam. All right, I'm going to go back to sharing the screen. And Supervisor Goldenberg.
You know, just as we move forward here, you know, the whole idea of coming up with this vegetation management ordinance is based on, we want to do everything possible to protect, you know, all the citizens and all the properties in Tuolumne County. And, you know, as Dory indicated earlier, you know, right now, the rules, you know, as such that we play by are, you know, revolving around the Public Resources Code with CAL FIRE. And so that calls for 100-foot clearances around structures, but it doesn't allow for vacant properties, and it doesn't allow for the situations on how we deal with the property owners, as Supervisor Campbell indicated. You know, you might have a homeowner that has 40 foot, and, you know, how do we achieve that extra 60 foot? So pretty much, what we're looking to do here is we want to put this in place for the protection of everybody. And, this last fire season, in 2021, we saw some historic fires once again. And, these fires, burned a tremendous amount of properties. And we saw that in previous years, recent years as well. So what we're trying to do is be proactive and eliminate as much as of the risk as we can. So we're, today's meeting, is one of several, right? Tonight is the second meeting. We're going to have an additional public meeting on January 26th at 6 p.m. And, again, I want to encourage participation. And then we're going to have more meetings leading up to our Fire Safety Advisory Committee, which Supervisor Campbell and I are both a part of. That next meeting is February 23rd, that we'll have the meeting after these, leading up to that. But the overall goal is we really want to get something in place and adopted by our board by April 1st, if at all possible, because we want to allow reaction time for people to be able to adapt to, new standards that would be put in place by an ordinance and have measures taken that, we can clear more properties and have them, better prepared in advance of the 2022 fire season. So that's just kind of a general outlook on how we're looking at moving forward here.
All right, Supervisor Campbell.
Okay, so we went over kind of some of the basics about why we need a vegetation ordinance. We have this bare minimum, which is the Public Resources Code. That's 100-foot around property. But to actually create a fire safe community in general, what communities like ours throughout the wildland urban interface are doing is they're going beyond the Public Resources Code. And I'm getting an echo, so if you have your computer, there we go, much better.
There you go. And there is a question in the chat as well, Supervisor. Do you want me to read the questions?
No, let me, we'll just go through this. So we're looking at vacant lots, how they would be applied, how the ordinance would be applied to those, how would the ordinance be applied to property line issues, and then how would it be applied in cases where you have ingress egress routes. One of the other elements to this, and it's something that it's certainly on its face, the main reason why you would want a vegetation ordinance is to create a safer community, and that's the overarching reason that we're talking about here. But I would say what's pushing the timeline for us, for our county a little bit, is some of the developments that have gone on with the State Board of Forestry. If you have never heard of that, it's the Board of Forestry oversees portions of how public regulations apply to private property with all over California, and for the most part areas like where we live. And what they're looking at is developing much more strict guidelines for how to develop properties. It even goes down to additions to your home, driveways, how those types of things are built. And so what's pushing kind of the timeline for our county in terms of the vegetation ordinance is that we retain a great deal more of our own ability to determine what that vegetation ordinance would look like if we do it ourselves. If we wait and we don't act, the state will come in and make many of those decisions for us, and it's quite likely that they will be more detrimental than what we could develop ourselves as a community. So that's one of the issues that's kind of needs to be in the back of your mind when we're thinking about this, is that these types of regulations are coming whether we want them to be there or not. It's beneficial to us if we have a voice in that, if we have the ability to determine our own destiny and what is acceptable to our own community. And that's what we're doing here, is trying to decide what the community standards would be for a vegetation ordinance. The question in the chat, I'll just kind of go to that real quickly. Do we have samples of vegetation ordinances that we can review and give input? Yes, we do. So Dory, I mean, are we ready? Do we have a sample of the vegetation ordinance that we're working on? Because we've actually worked on several types of ordinances that have been passed in other communities in our fire safety advisory committee. And of course, all of those are available to the public. When do you think that we'll have a kind of a draft ordinance for the community to provide input on, Dory?
As I put in the chat, we can make a link on the fire safety advisory of the ordinances we have looked at. So Sonora City, El Dorado, Butte, all of the different ones that we've been looking at. We do not have one to publicly present yet until it goes in front of the full fire safety advisory committee, and then we'll make that one public.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we can definitely put the ones that we have been looking at from the various counties and cities that have a similar ordinance that we are proposing.
And just to kind of, some of the guidelines that we had talked about in the fire safety advisory committee, that we tried to cherry pick from the cream of the crop in terms of how these ordinances were written. Looking at 40-foot boundary around unmaintained parcels, maybe less, maybe more, depending on the situation. Having some sort of resolution to that shared property line issue, where if your home is within 100 feet of the property line. So those types of things are kind of chiefly what we're looking at, and those are in some of the ordinances that we've looked at. And so part of the effort right now is to look at what the preferences of the community would be, so that we can keep that in mind and build that into our ordinance.
Great. I'm going to pop up another poll real quick, just to ask folks a question. Here we go.
And as you're popping that up, Dory, I would just like to chime in that everything that we're doing with these public meetings is we want to receive the input from the public, right? We know, there's a lot of things that we need to do in order to provide for the safety of the properties, but we don't want to do this in a void without public input. So that's a major purpose of these meetings is to gain that information.
Yep, so you see the poll, should property owners have to clear the entire property for defensible space, only just the perimeter of their property, or only the property that borders an adjacent lot with a built structure?
And then while you're doing that poll, we can talk a little bit about some of the potential benefits that we're hoping to get out of the vegetation ordinance. Of course, the overarching benefit, as we discussed, is to make our Tuolumne County a more fire safe community. But there are additional benefits to an ordinance of this type, in that it can have downward pressure on insurance rates. That's an issue that we're also trying to tackle with the committee, is to try and advocate for Tuolumne County, make our community more attractive, and put more pressure on the insurance commissioner and the insurance industry itself to spread the load of risk for insurance. And so from their perspective, if we're taking initiative and we're building these ordinances and making our community fire safe, it reduces that risk, and so it can cause downward pressure on insurance rates. And we've seen that in communities where these ordinances exist.
Supervisor, real quick, I just want to clarify that this is specific, this question that we're asking is specific to vacant lots only, so just to clarify. And thank you, Chief New.
And then the last thing is that, you know, many of the much of the work that's gone into creating fuel breaks and roadside vegetation reduction, almost all of those efforts that have happened within the county over the past, you know, 5 or 6 years have been grant funded. And so in the future, we're looking at many of these grants are going to require ordinance of this type or some sort of skin in the game for counties to try and make vegetation reduction part of the fabric of how our county is built. And that's going to help us get more fire fuel reduction dollars into our county, and again, make us a more attractive place to set up some of these projects that have been really successful in the past.
Yeah, I'm going to end the poll just for everyone because it looks like some folks are having a problem with submitting. It's getting an, oh, now it's okay. Okay, so we have 7 folks that responded to that, but I'll just share this right now. I will talk about one of the areas that we are going to launch, and we should have it ready to go before the next meeting on the 26th, is we are working on an actual survey with multiple questions that will have a QR code, and we will be circulating that through all of our social media outlets, sharing with our friends and partners to get the word out, the media, you know, the newspaper. It will be an actual QR code, as well as a URL link, because a lot of folks are unfamiliar with how to use a QR code. But it will then reach out to and take you to an actual survey. And it's really important that we circulate the survey because there's a lot of questions and a lot of areas, and we'll define a little bit more in detail, you know, some questions that we have that we want to hear from the public regarding a vegetation ordinance.
Yeah, so if I can,
go ahead.
I was just going to interject on that last poll, because looking at the results, you know, 71%, you know, indicated the entire property, and 29% perimeter. So, you know, just to reinforce and acknowledge that we understand, you know, that there's a lot of quite large agricultural properties, you know, within the county. And so when we look at an entire property, you know, we realize obviously if there's hundreds of acres, that that's not going to be, you know, feasible and really doesn't make much sense. What we're looking for is to get the biggest bang for our buck. And one of the things on the larger parcels is to ensure along the roadways, right? Because we get a lot of fire starts along the roadways. So, you know, that would kind of come into the perimeter portion, you know, of this last poll. And so just, you know, to bring that out into the open, we recognize that, you know, that it's not really realistic, you know, to do on very large parcels, you know, an entire parcel. So we want to get what we can, you know, the best protection possible.
Great, thank you. I'm going to switch this. So, Supervisor, I think both supervisors, I had you down for asking.
Yeah, I think, you know, if I'm all done, if there are questions or if we have some fire chiefs on, if they have anything to add, we're happy to have the discussion now.
Ask away.
And as Supervisor Campbell said, you know, any of our chiefs that are online, if you have some input that you would like to contribute, please do so. We very much want any questions, you know, to come into us either via the chat or even raising hands, you know, so that we can address your concerns.
Chief Murphy.
Good evening. Just want to, again, thank everybody that logged in and for the opportunity to have some comments and listen to the public for their input. We all the chiefs are united in attacking this issue with the county and with the community as well. So that's where it's real important that if you have some ideas and input, we certainly would like to hear it, either here tonight or, as Doris mentioned, you can contact her office or any of your fire departments. One of the big things to consider with this too is something that we kind of keep in mind. It's going to take a lot of patience and understanding all the way around, from the government side and the community side, and time. This wasn't a quick load of fuel onto our lands, and it's taken a long time to get here. It's going to take some time to get rid of. So we have that in mind as well, and we're looking forward to putting something in place to help protect our community.
Supervisor, there's a question in the chat box about making the Fire Safety Advisory Committee virtual.
So I'll take that to the best of my ability right now. We, due to staffing issues, we're still limited in how we can conduct our meetings. We are looking seriously at creating a common meeting room. The last update I had this week on that is that we have county staff that is looking at a particular property, the old recreational offices on Washington Street. And we have an RFP that is going out to see what we can do, to make that, the best way possible. Realizing that, many people want to participate, but we do have to be cognizant. I see a follow-up question on that. Will the room be done by April? I can't say that will be the case right now. I do know that the RFP is going out shortly, but I don't know how soon the turnaround time will be to make that happen.
Yeah, and just for everyone, the Fire Safety Advisory Committee, which both Supervisor Campbell and Supervisor Goldenberg sit on, voted to remain in person. The direction from the CAO, because of some staffing and limitation on doing both, was to do one or the other. And so the Fire Safety Advisory Committee itself, which is made up of 14 individuals, voted to keep it in person. And so until we can get additional support in doing both in that meeting room. The bid walkthrough actually was today on that facility. So hopefully, we have to follow all the timing protocols for that. We will get a better idea of when that could be made available, because there's some AV technology steps that have to be taken to prep that area or that building. So,
and just to note too, our meeting is held in the board chambers. It's a very good sized room, and even with the committee members being well spaced, there's a lot more space within the board chambers. So I would encourage, until we sort this out, that if anybody wants to participate, I really feel that they can do so and do so safely. We are enforcing that everybody wear masks, during our meeting. And there's a lot of room in there. So if you'd like to participate, please do come down.
are there any other chiefs? Chief New, did you want to say anything?
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, the city of Sonora did pass a vegetation ordinance back in 2019. to include vacant lots and egress and ingress to just help out with the fire danger that we have within the city limits of Sonora. We also, myself, in writing the ordinance, had a lot of input from the public. And so I think these meetings are extremely important since, we're talking about the entire county now. And dens, a lot of different types. And the city's approach was trying to ascertain the vacant lots in a way that was financially available for people to clear their lots. So if they had a larger portion, they weren't spending thousands and thousands of dollars and having to take out loans or come into some kind of financial distress over it, but at the same time be able to do their part to help clean up their lots that were adjacent to residential areas or lands next to them that had buildings, structures, or dwellings on them. And so that's where we started out with a 10-foot section of their property being cleared so that there's a little bit of a buffer between the two property lines. I would like to see something increased a little bit more, but again, that's going to take education and time and input from the public to do that. So initially we have our vegetation ordinance just starting out to allow people to be educated on the new process, do their part and help out in our community to keep it safe from wildfire as much as possible. And the same thing with the egress and ingress. It was whether it was a driveway or a roadway, if it's on private property, having them clear that back 10 feet as well to hopefully, anything that's tossed out from the side of the roads, not spark a wildfire that can be devastating to the entire community. So I think this is really great. I'm on board to help out as much as I can. I've lent our ordinance to as an example for the county to use and can give input as warranted. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Chief Neal. Do any of our other chiefs or work group members want to say anything?
Hey, good evening, Dory. This is Nick Cashy, Unit Chief for CAL FIRE, Tolman County Fire Department.
Awesome. Go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, I just want to throw out there, as we're evolving into being aware of the threats of wildfire, more so now with the mega fires we've seen over the past years than ever, the ability to go after fuels reduction work in the form of either the vacant lot ordinance that we're looking at, 4291, or fuel reduction in general, we have to have the same tenacity, the same as if we had a fire and are sending a response. So we've proven that the ability to combine suppression efforts with the preventative measures, it bodes the best for the community as far as success of saving structures or actually, keeping fires to a small acreage. And so this ordinance or something like this would allow us to continue that aggressive approach before smoke's in the air that gives us a better ability to contain fires and protect the community. So oftentimes we see that when the fires are going, that's when it's that heightened sense for the communities. But really, this type of work is what makes the difference by the time summer rolls around. So just for perspective, appreciate it.
Thank you, Chief.
I'd be interested to hear if anyone from our ag community, perhaps Nathan Wazosko, wants to, have some questions or, address concerns from that perspective.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So one of the issues and one of the questions I have is when we start talking about vacant lots, and it was semi-addressed earlier, I think you've got to come up with some kind of a parameter of what size you're talking about when you refer to things as vacant lots, because we know that there's a lot of areas that are agricultural areas. And the second thing I'm concerned about is we were talking about possibly doing some kind of perimeter work on open space ground such as agricultural ground. And I think one of the things that really has to be addressed is that the county and the state roadway is where a lot of these fires start. And you can have a fire guard, you can have a cleared space on your side of the property line. But if it's a big right of way, particularly on a state highway, and that thing gets going, it jumps those fire guards. it's a lot of the reason why we don't even try putting a lot of fire guards on. For one thing, terrain is a big disadvantage because sometimes the ground is not accessible with equipment. So then you would be required to use hand labor. So those are some of the concerns we have, but I would really like to see whatever ordinance goes through, you address, when you start referring to vacant lots, we come up with some kind of a definition, what you're referring to when you call it a lot.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic insight. I usually don't refer to them as vacant lots because really what we're talking about is undeveloped, unmaintained parcels, because vacant can be, there are parts of my property that are vacant. There's nothing on it, but what we're talking about is unmaintained property, and usually the ag community is, as you know, is one of our most responsible stewards of private property. I'd say the focus on, what you call vacant parcels or unmaintained, undeveloped parcels is more situations like what we have in Pine Mountain Lake or Ponderosa Hills or Crystal Fall, these subdivisions where you'll have relatively densely populated areas. And within those areas, you'll have parcels that were purchased for a development project at some point in the future where it didn't pan out, or it's just owned by someone somewhere where we're not able to contact that person to do routine maintenance on their property. Neighbors aren't able to contact that person. It's a very, very common issue in our county, more related to unmaintained parcels within relatively densely populated subdivisions. That's been a larger focus, I would say, for this than the ag element. But obviously all of these things have to be taken into consideration. But just to kind of address some of those concerns that it's more the undeveloped parcels that are in otherwise developed areas that pose the greatest risk.
And Supervisor, I wanted to just for that mapping purposes, Nathan, and you bring up a great question. So we are going to definitely, really look into that. But when we did that mapping, those vacant lots were queried specifically from an assessor's code. So they were just pulled that way. So we'll definitely look at that definition of what a vacant lot is, size wise or any other requirements. And we definitely want to hear you guys' input on that as well. So we appreciate that.
So, and, I'll chime back in here too, regarding the comments from Mr. Rosasco. There have been times, where there's been spray programs that have been conducted somewhat by Caltrans, somewhat by county agencies as well. Putting out pre-emergence can have pretty good effects, but that doesn't mean that they're widely acceptable for everybody. Particularly if there's areas that might be close to, say waterways or even a well. So those programs, they have a lot of viability. And I think that, through the state, that Caltrans has done some of this in the past, but, perhaps we can work with our partners at the state level, as well as look at the county level to see where we can go to complement that. Because, Nathan, you're quite correct, right? If we have a roadway, road right of way, and there's, maybe it's 30, 40 feet, whatever that distance is, if a fire starts along those, and we get a lot of starts along the roadways, it generates enough heat that it could easily, jump over some of your efforts, perhaps by disking or putting out a blade or two, with the dozer, and the terrain isn't always favorable, to doing that anyway. So we need to explore all the ways that we can possible, to get those areas protected, particularly along the roadways.
I also had a question for everyone as they think about it, because, you know, this is definitely a work in progress, but for our next meetings, what are the types of things that you want to see? Do you want to see specific language and us include, you know, some discussion items like, you know, the definition of vacant lots? I think that's a great subject to discuss. But what other types of, you know, what types of questions do you want answered in future meetings? You can put them in the chat box, or Nathan, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that I would suggest, and when we were talking about the size of lots, you know, even in our ag community, we realize one of the problems is there's a lot of land that's zoned agriculture that really isn't agricultural use. In other words, it's not what we consider to be productive agriculture. So I think those of us, in particular Farm Bureau, we're going to have a meeting here in the next week or so. I want to discuss that, because that's one of the things that we got to get a definition of for ourselves. Is if a piece of ground is zoned agriculture, it doesn't necessarily mean it's of ag use. And so I think what we're concerned about is, I think a lot of us who are in production agriculture, we take a different approach than people that have a piece of ground. It's maybe zoned ag, and it might be a large parcel, but it's not used as a production. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and actually, if I'm going to stop sharing real quick, if Sam could bring up that map, because when we were looking at this, many of us were looking at it, and as you zoom in and get to certain areas that are higher elevation, that are you know, agricultural, even, you know, above Sonora, and you know, we would love to be able to share this information with the agricultural community. So maybe Nathan, we can follow up, and we'd love to come to your meetings or sit down with a few folks and look at this and you know, drill down a little bit farther and help you guys with that message as well. But from an ordinance, vegetation, you know, management plan side of it, we need to be able to differentiate between those so that we can accurately, you know, carve out some of that language that might be different for the agricultural community that is truly already, you know, using that land agriculturally and doing some of that work that most people don't realize.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, I didn't have my button on. I think we could. Well, we're gonna have a meeting Monday night. So maybe what I'll do is I'll get back with you, and we'll see if we can maybe pick a particular time to kind of meet with some of you guys and follow through with this.
Perfect.
Okay.
That would be great.
All right.
Perfect. I'm putting my our email address, and it's up on the screen as well, so I'll share that back again.
Okay.
It's just OES, and my number. I'll put the OES number in here too, that you can call and get a hold of us. So.
And certainly you can reach out to either Supervisor Campbell or myself directly as well. We'd be glad to, you know, see what we can do.
Supervisor Campbell.
So there's a question in the chat regarding the biomass removal and help with chipping, biomass pickup, that kind of thing. That's something that I know Supervisor Goldenberg and I have talked a lot about. The ordinance itself will focus on just what the rules are. So what properties should look like, how vegetation should be maintained on properties. Going beyond that, we're going to come into these issues where how does somebody with property that is on a fixed income afford to maintain it to the level that the ordinance requires? Okay, things like that is the next step. That's where we're looking for funding. We're looking for grants. We're looking at things like funding biomass removal, chipping programs, that type of issue. So it goes together with this issue is what do you do with the vegetation once you get it removed? You know, that's the problem that everyone faces. And so that is going to have to be part of the discussion with this. It's, you know, it all requires money. You know, anytime you have biomass removal, biomass pickup, where you're going to put it, any type of endeavor like that is going to cost more than just lop and scatter or just burn piles, that type of thing. So finding the funding for it, whether it's through grants, you know, Air Resource Control Board, those types of things, I think that would be a really valuable part of the discussion to have. And I think if the community is willing and able to really push for those things and support efforts to make it happen, I think we could see it happen. I think there's more support now in the community for types of for biomass facilities than there has been in the past.
So I'll jump in here too. Both Supervisor Campbell and myself sit on the Solid Waste Committee, and you know, we are exploring avenues there as well. You know, can we initiate some of these chipping programs, pickup programs, and we're constantly looking for funding in order to do that, as well as you know, through other county personnel. We're always looking for grant opportunities to assist people, because we know that this is not easy, right? You know, there's many people that, you know, very desperately want to clear their parcels, but they either physically are unable to do so or financially unable to do so. So any opportunities that we see, and we've had a few programs, you know, where, you know, we've been able to do this in some communities, and we're trying to, you know, keep looking for other opportunities as we go along. So yeah, we, you know, a lot of times, you know, if you have a subdivision, maybe they've got a, you know, a vacant lot, and we could set up a chipping, you know, point, and people could bring their stuff there. We want to make it as convenient and easy as possible for people to get rid of, you know, the materials at no cost to themselves, if at all possible.
All righty, I don't see any more questions in the chat box, Supervisor.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, then we've got about 5 minutes left, but we can go ahead and call it a night early. Thank you very much, Dory. You're kind of the guiding force with a lot of this, making this happen. So thank you, Dory. Thank you, committee members, Supervisor Goldenberg, and most of all, thank you, everyone who took time out of your evening to help us ruminate on this, help us get a better picture of some of what should be included in the ordinance. And you'll be seeing a draft ordinance very soon that will, I think, give us a more solid foundation to base a lot of these questions on, and get a clearer picture of what the community is looking for, and what will be, I think, about that balance between private property and then the need for increased fire safety in our community. Supervisor Goldenberg, anything else?
No, just to reinforce, our next meeting will be January 26th at 6 p.m. We will put that out via all the, you know, standard methods that Dory has been using to get the word out, but would like, you know, as many people, again, to participate and offer their comments, because we're definitely moving forward with this. We need to. It's very important. This is critically important for the protection, you know, of the people in the county. So we need to, but we want to get your input, you know, before we make any final decisions.
And I did, we will have a recording of this as well as the previous on our Fire Safety Advisory Committee webpage. And then we will also put the flyer for the next one on there. And if anyone has any questions or want to submit written comments beforehand, you can do so at the OES email address that is listed, or you can drop them by here at the County Administrative Office, 2 South Green Street on the 4th floor.
Okay, well, with that, thank you very much, everyone, and have a lovely afternoon and a wonderful weekend.